Good evening and welcome. This is the People's Platform. Knowledgeability of and accessibility to family planning is essential to enable a generation of women who are empowered and secure. Moreover, reproductive health is essential for all genders. It is also an internationally enshrined right. However, during crises, sexual and reproductive health needs tend to be overlooked by governments as well as other stakeholders, as a result of which severe economic and social issues ensue. Today's discussion will be on the importance of mainstreaming the sexual and reproductive health and rights discourse in Sri Lanka. Tonight's guests, let me very quickly introduce them to you. We are joined by Dr. Pramila Senanayake, International Consultant on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Family Planning. Good evening and welcome to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Sonali.
Thank you. And also we are joined by Dr. Rashmira Balasurya, Director at the ACA Initiative. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Sonali.
As a precursor to this conversation, Dr. Pramila, in your opinion, why is it that in Sri Lanka there is so much shame associated with this very ordinary, physiological, universal function that is sex?
Thank you, Sonali, for asking me to this discussion. It's one of my very pet topics and I love to talk about it, so I'm happy to be here. Your question is a very important one. I haven't thought through that a lot, but I think one answer would be the outcomes. When out of a sexual act, the outcomes are horrendous. It could be an infection, it could be rape, it could be an unwanted pregnancy. So when these outcomes happen, then of course there's a lot of shame and guilt and everything else. You mentioned the expansion of family planning into reproductive health and sexual health. It was in 1994 in Cairo that they held the first international conference on population and development. Right. And that conference broadened the whole area of family planning to cover sexual and reproductive health and rights. And that is universal. All governments signed towards that, and therefore that has to be a right to every citizen in our country, even as young as children, because they have some rights too, young adults, adolescents, older people. So it's a right for men and women, and we need to make sure that the government helps implement that right, and then those shame and stigma will not arise. What the ICPD conference said was every sexual act should be safe, free of infection and free of coercion. Right. That every pregnancy that comes out has to be safe and wanted. And every childbirth has to be well taken care of and provided. So once you go through that series of events, then life is going to be well and happy for all the people concerned.
Okay, perfect. Dr. Rashmira, if we talk about the gendered aspect of sexual educations and sexual rights, why is it that we see women in Sri Lanka marginalized and victimized as a result of a lack of knowledge, a lack of access to sexual health, reproductive health?
I think in a broad term, like speaking broadly, we live in a very patriarchal society, and that is the root cause of everything really, and the reason why women are often given a backseat when it comes to things like autonomy, healthcare, anything at all really. Women take a backseat, especially in rural areas, because of there's a patriarchal system that goes on in Sri Lanka. And I think, unfortunately, by and large, authoritative figures who make decisions when it comes to sexual health and reproductive health are largely male. So they will never have to go through what a woman goes through in terms of childbirth, in terms of contraception, because largely a lot of contraception is for women. But they make these decisions for a woman. So I think, unfortunately, it's a very patriarchal system that we're in Sri Lanka, and that's why I think women, unfortunately, are taking the back seat.
Dr. Pramila, why is it so normalized, not just in Sri Lanka, but also in other jurisdictions, for men to be at the decision-making table, making decisions on behalf of women over matters that they have no clue about?
You're so right, Sonali. We take it for granted. We say it's cultural. In Sri Lanka, men dominate the women. But that is not correct. I mean, we women should, in the nicest possible way, stand up and speak our mind and get the men to understand what is going on in our bodies, in our pregnancies, in their bodies that do harm to us. So I think we need to give that education, and we call it sex education, we call it family life education. We may label it in any way, but that is the root cause, I think, of some of these situations, because we lack sex education. And sex education has a bad name to it. People think it's about sex, it's about positions, it's about pornography. It is not. It's about family life, how to live, about relationships, gender-based issues. And these can be taught not just in schools. Yes, schools can do a lot to help, but it can be done in skills training institutions, out of schools, even in temples and churches. We can teach them to young people, to adolescents. We neglect the adolescent because many strata of society think talking to adolescents means opening the door for them to have sex. That is not the case. When you're informed, you are much better equipped to follow the instructions and to lead a safe and happy life. So I think this myth about sex education promotes promiscuity is not true. It had been proven over and over again, not just in Sri Lanka but elsewhere, that teaching them and giving them the right facts will empower them to behave better and to have a happy life.
Absolutely. Let's talk a bit about the need for an attitudinal shift in Sri Lanka when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, Dr. Rashmira. Why do you think that society prefers to not know about reproductive health, contraception, sexual health, and yet engage in sex without knowing the first thing about it, as a result of which people end up going through unwanted pregnancies, abortions, and it's also criminality in Sri Lanka. The mental health issues, it sort of catapults into so many other issues just because you're just unwilling to learn about or acknowledge the importance of learning about sex education.
I think, Sonali, for generations and generations, there's an attitude that we mustn't speak about it. If we don't speak about it, then it doesn't happen. That attitude has always been there. And there's, like you said earlier, there's so much of shame and stigma when it comes to sex in general in Sri Lanka, that people would rather just get on with the act but not really know anything about contraception, how to be safe during it, consent, informed consent. I think recently there was an issue with a cricketer as well, a national cricketer, with regards to consent, and it really shocked me to my core. So many people came out and said, well, if she went home with it, she could to it.
Exactly.
And I was shocked because I thought nobody understood that during sex you can withdraw consent before the act, during the act. It's normal. And I always give the example that if you went for a medical examination with a doctor and a doctor was doing a prostate exam, for instance, you have the right to withdraw consent anytime. And you wouldn't want a doctor to keep on doing an examination, an intimate examination, when you said no.
Right.
And that is similar when it comes to consent of a sexual act. So this attitude that we don't want to know, but we'll get on with it and see what comes out of it, is really irresponsible. And that is the reason why Sri Lanka has so many unsafe abortions taking place every single day. There's a 2016 statistic that says that more than 650 unsafe abortions take place in Sri Lanka every day. And this is pre-COVID, pre-economic crisis, when there was much more access available to contraception, to healthcare services. And now after COVID, after lockdowns, and people couldn't get access to contraception, couldn't get access to healthcare, I can't imagine how much higher that statistic is today with the number of unsafe abortions.
And just imagine the suffering that these women have to go through just in vain. Right? So I want to connect the policymakers to this discussion. So in terms of policymakers, we have an overwhelming majority of men who again sit at decision-making tables. as to whether these policymakers that we've elected to office, as to whether they care about sexual and reproductive health and the need to have this as something that's so essential to Sri Lanka's economic development also. I don't know. Dr. Pramila, how do you view this?
If you look at policy, Sri Lanka does have quite a lot of good policies. So the gap is between the policy and its implementation.
Sure.
So we have to first look at the policies we have and make sure that they're implemented. Yes, indeed, there are some policies that we could have, newer ones that would do better. But let's look at the implementation side. The other thing I want to bring up while I was listening to Rashmira was there are a lot of myths surrounding sexual and reproductive health and contraception. And these myths come about because the proper education has not been given, proper information has not been given. Now, for example, they will say if you stand up and have sex, you don't get pregnant. Or the first time you have sex, you never get pregnant. Now, these are all total myths. And when young people, particularly adolescents, are given this kind of information, they try to use it in the wrong way. And so I think firstly we have to debunk a lot of these myths. We have to get started with the right level of education in the language they understand, at the level they understand. You don't need to talk about science and technology, but simple ways to explain things. And then of course we have to look at policies. I mean, the policy on abortion is a very obvious one, which has played, snowball between parliaments and governments over the years. Must have been in the early late 1990s that they started looking at the policy on abortion. At the moment in Sri Lanka, it's criminalized. Abortion is a crime. And that we have to check, and who are the architects of these policies. Yes, as you say, mostly men. There are some right-thinking men, of course, who do develop good policies. I still remember in the 1990s, Mr. G.L. Pires. I don't know whatever party he's in now, but he fought hard for the rights of women and for the law on abortion. So we have a lot of right-thinking men too. We have women who sometimes oppose policies for women. So we have to work very carefully with both sides to ensure that our community, our women and men, have the right information and the policies.
Dr. Rashmira, we spoke about the importance of debunking certain myths when it comes to sex education, etc. I'd like to bring in the importance of incorporating comprehensive sexuality education into the school curriculum. Speak to us about the whole debacle of the Hate Pota.
The Hate Ape Pota was actually brought in to educate grade 7s on sexual and comprehensive sexuality education. And there was a huge backlash and uproar about it because of a very small statement, I think, on masturbation and that it's normal. And there was a huge uproar about it, and the book was withdrawn. I think even the policymakers who had introduced the book initially said that we don't want to make such a big statement politically, so we will take the book back. Of course, there was religious groups that got involved, and this book was withdrawn. But it's now circulated a lot among social media, amongst mothers, especially in Colombo, because it's a good book with comprehensive sexuality education, something that was sorely lacking in our school systems, in our education systems. Because what people and civilians don't understand, especially the lawmakers and the religious groups, is that, like Dr. Pramila said, it's not just about teaching you the reproductive systems, menstruation and things like that. It's teaching you consent, it's teaching you how to seek, how to not get pregnant, and basically giving you information that giving you the knowledge to make a informed decision when it comes to your body, giving you autonomy over your body and the power to make a decision when it comes to anything pertaining to sexual and reproductive health later on in years. And like Dr. Pramila said, there's so much evaluation research that has been done to show that it doesn't promote sex. It doesn't promote adolescents to go out and have sex, because they can easily go on Google, which everybody has a phone now, everyone has 3G, 4G access to the internet. They will Google and find out, so there's so much of misinformation out there on the internet. So if you give these adolescents comprehensive sexuality education in the schools itself, they are informed and empowered with the correct information to go and make the right decision later on in life. And we can stop so much of these unsafe abortions, sexually transmitted infections. HIV rates are highest now amongst the adolescents, the 50 to 25 age group. There's a high rate of HIV incidence in that age group. There's so much that we can stop. Also about rape, incest, teaching children about consent, good touch, bad touch, things like that. There's so much that sex education can do for a young person, not just at that moment in their life, but also in the future.
So this is common sense, Dr. Pramila. I mean, teaching kids about good touch, bad touch, age-appropriate sex education. It's such common sense, but I mean, and we've been having these kinds of conversations. The Family Planning Association is doing such good work and trilingually in collaboration with other stakeholders, the UNFPA. We have so many organizations, the ACA initiative on promoting reproductive health, sexual health and the rights discourse. However, there's a massive gap, there's a massive disconnect between societies and this education aspect of it. What do we do?
We have tried hard. We have tried hard. As you said, UNFPA and the Family Planning Association are leaders in this field, and they have been successful too, but in small pockets, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the skills, not the skills, but we don't have sufficient staff, I guess. I mean, if the FPA and the UNFPA were allowed to go to every nook and corner of this country promoting their messages, I think it will be a different world for the people we are talking about. Yeah. The problem is finances, problem is the opposition that comes up sometimes from various sources. So we need really some people to move the program forward into every part of the country.
Who is able to do that, Dr. Pramila, in your opinion, as in terms of stakeholders? Recently I watched an interview done by the Advocata Institute where they said that for every 17 citizens there is a government servant. So it's not like we're lacking government servants to help out with something as important as this. So we also are aware that budgetary allocations when it comes to sexual and reproductive health are abysmal.
Yeah. It is.
So in whose interest is it to move this conversation forward?
I think primarily it's in the interest of the community, the people, the young people, the men and women who are growing up in society. It's in their interest that they get the right information, the right knowledge, access to right, contraception, if we talk about contraception, but access just not to information, but all areas, to healthcare and services. And to that extent, I'm reminded that even though we have a good medical service compared to many other countries, we still could use our midwives and nurses who are in the villages, going from house to house to take this message forward. And they are a strata of society that's looked up to. If a nurse tells you something, you respect them. If a midwife tells you something, you believe her and you take it for granted. So I think we should use them. But also peer education is a very important aspect. Young people listen to other young people rather than older people. So we have to train the younger people to talk to them. In factories, talk to other factory workers, not to the boss or anybody else. If you're in the garment trade and you're at a sewing machine, talk to other people who are working with the sewing machine and let them pass the message on. And they can use personal experience. They can say, when I was pregnant, this is what happened to me or whatever. And so we have to get this message not only at the top, but all the way down to the grassroots through the people that are leaders in society. They could be Grama Sevaka Niladaris, they could be school teachers, mothers. Mothers can, if they are trained, can pass the message on to their children. But mothers and fathers are quite, I suppose, shy and embarrassed to talk about these issues to their children. But fathers should be brought into the equation, men, and they should get the information so they don't misguide others, but they can explain the things carefully to other men and to their families and to their children. So I think we have to involve everybody, but give them the right information.
Dr. Ashmira, when we speak about the importance of mainstreaming this discourse of sexual and reproductive health and rights, there's an undue interference by members of the clergy, which we see at every sort of turn.
Yeah.
How do we tackle this?
I think the issue we have is, like you said, there's so much of interference from a lot of parties that are not necessarily, it's not the expertise. Sexual and reproductive health is not the expertise of religious groups, right? Religious groups are experts in religion. And I think it's important that even our politicians, our policymakers, value the opinion of the civilians, not just the religious makers. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about sexual and reproductive health rights, it doesn't largely impact the religious groups and the religious leaders, right?
Sure.
And again, for example, I'll tell you, when it came to discussing abortions, all the people at the table were doctors, the doctors were male, and the religious leaders were also male. None of them will ever have to go through an unplanned pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy, or an abortion. None of them will ever know not just the biological impact, but also the psychological impact of having an abortion. Sure. And I think the religious groups need to realize that and understand that there is so many issues that are happening today in Sri Lanka because we don't have comprehensive sex education. Things like rape, child rape, incest, and all of this can be to a large extent curtailed if they have comprehensive sexuality education, access to contraception, limiting the unplanned pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies. So I think the religious leaders should also realize that there are such a lot of benefits that come out of comprehensive sexuality education, and just lingering on one statement doesn't help solve any problems for anybody. If they want to make an impact to stop the rape and the incest that happens in Sri Lanka, they need to endorse comprehensive sexuality education.
Is there a proper mapping process that takes place with regard to statistics when it comes to incest, rape, child abuse? Is there a proper comprehensive analysis of the incidents that get reported to the police, that get reported to the hospitals?
No, I would say, but that's not only Sri Lanka. It's a tough area to get statistics from. Most people, most girls, if they get raped, they don't want to talk about it. So one can't expect accurate, perfect statistics on these areas. However, there is, for example, Sri Lanka has the highest rates of gender-based violence. I saw a report from the UN which said in the world. Now, those are not made up, but obviously some of it is guesstimate, but there is certain amount of accuracy in getting those data. If a father has incest with the daughter, it's highly unlikely that it will get reported, leave alone to the mother or the police. So those numbers go undetected. It's sad that when it comes to discussing sexual and reproductive health and rights, it's a strange group of, as I say, bedfellows who get together from, as you say, the clergy to maybe even some other strata of society. They get together to oppose whatever you and I think is right and correct to do. So we have to disband these bedfellows, make sure that one by one they look at their own area of competence. Now, with regard to the clergy, I don't say that temples and churches can't advise their young people in the right way, but they have a limit to which they can go and stop there, tell them from a moral or religious point of view what you should and should not do, but don't stand in the way of what is scientifically proven and correct. So I think we have to work with all strata, especially if they're passing on misinformation. Let's get that corrected first, because the last thing we want is the children to go to school and be told one thing, and to go to temple or church and be told something else. So we really have to work with all of them to correct the misinformation, give them the right information, and move forward.
And I also feel, Doctor, that there has to be importance attached to scientific knowledge, knowledge of experts. And we have experts in Sri Lanka. We have a fantastic set of people who are working around the clock on these areas of importance.
Contraceptive technology is one key area.
Right.
We have in the world today numerous good, effective, safe methods of contraception that can be used by most people. But the myth that surrounds them, the pill causes infertility, for example, is one myth that goes on. It's totally wrong. The pill, in fact, can help you conceive when you want to. So like that, the IUD, if you fix an intrauterine device in the womb, in the uterus, it can travel up to your nose and eyes and come out. This kind of myth is there, and people, because these are people who talk about this all the time. So we need to debunk a lot of these myths. We have very good methods of contraception, and what people don't know is that contraceptives not only take care of preventing contraception, but there are beneficial effects of contraception which are not related to conception. For example, ovarian cancer can be prevented by using some contraceptives, and so on and so on. So there are some positive aspects that we need to let people know and not put fear into their minds by giving this wrong information.
How important is it, Dr. Rashmira, for men to get involved in this discourse, for men to be allies in knowledge dissemination, in sharing knowledge with one's partner? If we can draw a slight parallel with menstrual health and hygiene. We see now that society is moving towards a direction of more acceptance among males as well, because earlier women used to bleed and men would sort of
shy away.
Yes, men would sort of
hide.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because of that lack of information. However, now we see a trend towards normalization of, and also, in the city sort of setup, it's different as opposed to rural Sri Lanka.
100%.
Yes. So speak to us about the importance of men getting involved in the conversation.
I think it's so important to have men at the table to talk about, for example, menstruation, because this is again a basic biological process. But again, a lot of people who tax menstrual products are men. The policymakers are men. So I think it's really important. That's why comprehensive sexuality education doesn't just target females, males. It targets everybody. Everybody is told what happens in a woman's body. Everybody is told what happens in a man's body, in a male's body. So when males understand what goes on in a menstruator's body, they are more likely to take an interest and realize, oh, this is what a menstruator goes through. Oh, they bleed so much. Oh, they get pain during this.
Sympathy, empathy.
Right. Because others, they think, oh, she's faking it. Her pain can't be real. And they don't understand the impact of going through a monthly cycle every month.
Basic empathy.
It's not there.
Dignity, kindness.
So even, for instance, like girls are scared to go to school because their uniforms are white. If they don't have proper menstrual hygiene products, then they leak. Then there's a huge red patch on your white dress. What will the boys in school say? It's a huge issue, and that's why it's so important to bring not just the older men who are making policies, but also the younger adolescent males to understand and be a bit more empathetic and kind towards their, female colleagues who are going to have every month a menstrual cycle, and it's completely normal.
One other point I would like to make when we talk about misnomers and myths. Now in Sinhalese, I'm sorry, audience is English speaking, but the word we use for menstruation is Suddha Vima. So what does that mean? There's cleansing, there's dirt, it has to go away. That's a myth that a lot of people have. It's not cleansing, it's a very normal bodily function. The lining of the uterus gets shed every month, and if it doesn't get shed, then if you want to conceive, it has to happen after the uterus has shed its lining. Where is the dirty blood? Then, it's so difficult to convince them. So I talk to them and I say, okay, you've been pregnant once, to a man, and what your wife had been pregnant. She has gone through 9 months. Has she had a period? No. What happened to the dirty blood? We don't know. The dirty blood went to help form your baby. So, you have to use language that they can understand with any myth to demystify it. So, yes, the topic of menstruation is very important for sexual education in schools, particularly in mixed schools, in university. So I think we have to get the male. Thing is, they have something called a sperm arc, which is when they have their first ejaculation, but they don't go through the cycle that we go through with pain maybe and heavy bleeding. So they can't really see a parallel between the two, but we have to make sure that they do understand.
And also, for instance, like Dr. Pramila was saying, menstruation is so important, and it's so important to teach the trainers, those who are, esteemed persons in society. For instance, there was a study done in Kalutara, and a significant percentage of teachers thought that menstrual blood was dirty blood.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now these teachers are teaching the students that.
Right.
And then the cycle keeps going on, the cycle of misinformation and shame when it comes to having your period. And that's why we need to train the trainers, train teachers, train principals, people who have a prominent place in society and who are looked up to. So they can give the right information to the students and to the adolescents. I think that's very important.
Very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
මිනිසුන්ට කන්න නැහැ. උද්දමනය 100%කින් වැඩි වෙලා.
විදුලි කප්පාදුවක් ජනවාරි මාසෙ තුල යන්න කිසිසේත්ම අපි කටයුතු කරන්නෙත් නැහැ.
දත්තුණා කියවන්න නැත්නම් අලුතින් ණය දෙන්නේ කවුද?
නමට වාමාංශික සල්ලි එන්න දකුණ.
කාරුණ්‍ය මර්ධනය කිරීම වහා නතර කරන්න.
ෆයිනල් කාල් සතියේ දිනවල සවස 6ට.
This country belongs to the people.
You can't have a setback again where we have to go for the 18th time to IMF.
What chances are, will we have these local government elections soon?
The shortages, the queues, everything came in while we were servicing our debt.
If Mr. Wickremesinghe continues, every hour there will be agitations in this country.
And spend Christmas in the spirit of giving and sharing.
One politician cancels a power plant. Then the same politician tries to get another power plant built in place of the cancelled power plant.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Live.
Newsline, Monday to Friday at 8:30 p.m. on TV1.
Welcome back. You're with the People's Platform. We're in conversation with Dr. Pramila Senanayake and Dr. Rashmira Balasurya. We're discussing the importance of mainstreaming the sexual and reproductive health and rights discourse in Sri Lanka. Dr. Pramila, let's talk a bit about human aspect of the economic crisis and COVID-19, where young women have had to, across the country, across different social stratas, have had to resort to prostitution.
You put your finger, Sonali, on a very important issue. We have lots of young girls from around the country who study very hard, get the necessary A levels, get the Z scores, and their parents are delighted. My daughter is going to university, whether it's Karapiti or Jaffna or Gaul, doesn't matter. Now, when that daughter gets to university, she cannot travel from home. She has to find accommodation locally. If she is lucky, she'll get a room for 5,000 rupees to share with 2 or 3 others. Then she needs meals. She needs 3 meals a day, whether it's Poya Day or Christmas Day, she has to eat. What can you buy for 50 rupees a meal? Nothing. But let's say, it'll cost her 5,000 to 6,000 rupees a month to eat. She has to travel home to see her parents. She has to get some decent clothes. So my estimate is that a girl at university today who has to stay in accommodation that's found close to university, it'll cost her 15,000 to 20,000 rupees. Mahapula, we have scholarships, we have other organizations giving scholarships, but no one give her 15,000 rupees a month. So what does she do? She sells her body. I mean, Sonali, how can you look down on that girl? I can only say I admire her in a strange way. If I was in that plight, I can sell a bangle or a ring or something. She has nothing to sell other than her body. Her parents have high expectations of her. My daughter has gone to university to study biology or medicine or science. I'm waiting for my daughter to come back home and get her married and have a wonderful life. And yet they don't know how much the daughter is suffering financially. She can't talk to the parents, so she just goes out and sells her body as much as she needs to make the pittance that she needs to pay for accommodation and food. These are true stories. I have witnessed them myself through children that I have seen at university and in the villages. So this is not fiction. This is the truth.
Dr. Ashmira, adding to that, in Sri Lanka, we are quick to judge.
Yeah.
There is also rampant misogyny, chauvinism, and a hatred for quote-unquote women with loose morals. Equally, there is there's a lack of a framework for prostitution. However, there are spas and massage parlors every 400 meters. And they are open 24 hours of the day.
Yes.
So speak to us about the double standards in society, the hypocrisy that we too are a part of.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, this is like what I was speaking about earlier in terms of like living in this very patriarchal society where women, anything a woman does is kind of, they try to find fault with anything a woman does, quite frankly. It seems to a large extent like as if men literally hate us because anything we do they find fault with. And like Dr. Pramila is saying, sometimes the only choice a woman has today is to sell her body, unfortunately. Not everybody is just doing it for the fun of it. Some people are really caught in between a rock and a hard place and have no other choice in life than to resort to sex work. And it's again very hypocritical because a lot of men enjoy this, enjoy this kind of thing, but
they patronize
it, but then on the other end they also look down upon it.
Exactly.
When they're talking about it in public. And like you said, there is a massage parlor or a spa every 400, 500 meters.
Really?
And so everybody knows what's happening, but nobody really wants to give them any kind of
support,
or even ask them why they resorted to this. Nobody wants to help them at all.
Dr. Pramila, let's speak about the importance of regulation of these industries, the service industries. So how do we bring in legal regulation, and how do we also ensure that these women, their health is taken care of? How do we bring this into the mainstreamed discourse in Sri Lanka?
The Family Planning Association, I know, is working with HIV positive families and HIV positive women, and also with commercial sex workers.
Right.
We can look down upon them, or we can help them at least to live safely and to ensure that they are not infecting anybody and that they are not infected. So there are ways to provide the health care they need, at least, and then educate them, train them into getting out of this job, as it were, that they are doing, into jobs that are much more, I wouldn't say, that are safer, and also that are better for them for the rest of their lives to continue. So they go into prostitution or commercial sex workers because they have no choice, most of them. No income, no choice, 2 children, husband has left them. I mean, all kinds of circumstances when you talk to them, you hear of. So I think we need to, I wouldn't say sympathize, but we need to understand their plight rather than look down upon them, help them to get out of that plight.
Dr. Ashmira, how do we attempt at bridging this gap between the Sri Lankan society that is bereft of proper information on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and a set of policymakers who are largely unaware of the importance of this need?
I think you just you hit the nail on the head basically, Sonali, because we need to create more awareness about the problems that are actually happening today in Sri Lanka in terms of sexual and reproductive health issues. We need to bring this to light, basically, and that's why I think the FPA, Vietaka initiative, we work so much in spreading the word out there to make everybody understand the issues that we have in this country that everybody turns a blind eye to. Everybody's scared to kind of take a stance in it, especially the political leaders, the policymakers. They need to have a backbone, really, to realize that there needs to be a change.
Because it's not some kind of magic, right?
Exactly. And even now, when we talk about that grade 7 book, when you ask who recalled the book, because before the religious leaders created an issue, the government itself recalled that book. When you ask who recalled the book, it becomes a ball passing game. Oh, we did it, no, the other party did it, we did it. No one wants to take responsibility for even issuing the book, nor recalling the book.
So what's the status as at now?
There is no book.
There is no book.
There is no book.
So we have like all our children have no
so
way
there
of...
is a book that's for physical education book, but that book has also a lot of issues. For instance, when it comes to rape, the book clearly states sometimes rape is the victim's fault.
Wow.
Which is
literally
so...
victim blaming.
Wow.
And this is what we are giving our students. So no one had an issue with that book.
Right.
That book is out there. But this really good book, which had the right information and the correct way, has got withdrawn and recalled.
So we need to call out the stakeholders who are in charge of the country's children, youth,
100%,
adolescents.
yeah.
So the main stakeholders would be the Ministry of Education,
yes,
the Ministry of Health,
yes,
too,
and the President and Prime Minister of the country.
Yes, and also other groups like teacher training associations, PTAs.
Right.
You know, the groups that can fight for it. All the PTAs, the parent-teacher associations, get together and have a major battle and demand this book. I think they'll get it. So they have a lot of power, though they don't get together and work.
Even the National Child Protection Authority.
National Child Protection Society.
Stake.
Yeah. In conclusion, I think it's important to ensure that this policy framework that we have needs to be properly implemented, and all the key stakeholders need to work in collaboration with each other and not just in silos. So Dr. Pramila, how must we go about doing that?
There's a long way to go, but I think we can start. We can start by bringing the organizations, individuals who are doing good work.
Right.
We have examples, so use those examples and show the others who are ignorant or who are not aware how you can do it. But it's a small example of a sex education in a school, in an office, in a garment factory. We can show those examples, and let's hope that the others who have an influence on such things can take it forward and multiply it and take it around the world country. It's not difficult, because once you drop a pebble and it just ripples around, and we have that possibility. And I mean, I have recently come across a very interesting project called the Mata Foundation. What they do is they take Grama Sevaka Niradharis. They don't work with the hierarchy and the politician. They go to the Grama Sevaka Niradhari, train some people from there without politics, and get them to start projects at the village, at the Grama Sevaka level, to spread the message forward, whether it's agriculture, whether it's education or health. So I think we can start with examples bottom up. I think top down we have tried and it hasn't worked too well. So bottom up approaches, very much like the Mata Foundation is doing in other aspects, we can work for.
The rug and forgotten about, and the curtain is closed for, like I was talking about earlier, incest, rape, child rape. We prefer to turn a blind eye to it because it's an uncomfortable topic. I think the more we talk about these uncomfortable topics and make people aware that they are still out there, nothing is being done to solve them, I think that's how we as a society can try to overcome the shame surrounding sex. Because the more we make sex a shameful topic, the more that child rape, domestic violence, incest, all these issues are kind of shown the back door and not given enough attention.
And finally, Dr. Pramila, you've worked extensively on this area. You also served as the Assistant Director General of International Planned Parenthood Federation in the UK. how do you see Sri Lankan society improving in terms of its acceptance of sex ed, sexual rights?
Can't be done overnight, but I think there is hope. I think there are people and pockets that have shown us how it can be done, and I think we need to learn from those who've gone ahead and follow their example, and hopefully little by little the country will turn around. That's my hope and prayer for this country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was such an interesting discussion. I think we covered a lot of areas which are of crucial importance. Thank you so much, Dr. Pramila Senanayaka, International Consultant on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Family Planning, Dr. Rashmira Balasurya, Director, the ARCA Initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again on Monday with the Sinhala edition of the People's Platform. Have a safe weekend. Good night.